Our scripture reading today is from Psalm 46, one which says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in time of trouble. A story's been told about John, who had spent years building his dream home, a symbol of his success, hard work, and ambition. Every weekend, he would labor tirelessly to make sure every detail was perfect. Whether it was laying the foundation, framing the walls, or picking out the perfect color for the kitchen, he was fully invested. He had envisioned this house as the place where his children would grow up, where he and his wife would share anniversaries, where they would laugh and create memories that would last a lifetime. This home represented not just a roof over their heads, but the culmination of years of sacrifice, sweat, and perseverance. But one night, as John and his family lay asleep, disaster struck. A fire, sparked by a faulty wire, broke out in the dead of night. In an instant, the house that had taken so long to build was engulfed in flames. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left but smoldering ruins. The home he had poured his heart and soul into, the very place he had envisioned growing old in, was gone. When John arrived at the scene, he was paralyzed. His heart sank as he stood in front of the burning wreckage, the walls of his life work reduced to nothing but ashes. His family had made it out safely, thank God, but the devastation he felt was overwhelming. Everything he had worked for was lost in an instant. All those late nights of hard work, the years of careful planning, and the money spent, it all seemed so meaningless now in the face of this great loss. He looked at his wife, his children, and in that moment, he couldn't even find the words to comfort them. In the midst of this crushing despair, John sank to his knees. He felt as though the very earth beneath him had crumbled. He thought of Psalm 46:1, which had always comforted him in times of trouble. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. But in that moment, it was hard to see how God could be a refuge when everything he had worked for was gone. He cried out to God, not with anger, but with an aching, desperate heart. God, where are you? How can I move forward? How will I ever recover from this? His pain and sorrow were so heavy, it felt like they would crush him. His life felt like it had just unraveled, and he didn't know how to start picking up the pieces. But as the days passed, something extraordinary began to unfold. The phone rang with the voices of friends who had heard about the fire. One by one, they offered their help in ways John could never have imagined. His childhood friend Mark opened his home to John's family, allowing them to stay with him until they figured out what to do next. Other friends brought over food, clothing, and even toys for the kids. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make John realize that, even in his darkest moment, God was providing. It wasn't just his friends and family. The church they had been attending for years rallied around them in an outpouring of love. People who didn't know John personally reached out to offer whatever they could. Some gave money, others donated items like toiletries, blankets, and clothes. The church also started a fundraising campaign, and before long, they had enough to help John rebuild his life, one step at a time. A local furniture store heard about the fire and, moved by compassion, offered to donate furniture for the new house once it was ready. A neighbor who had only spoken to John in passing before offered him a temporary job to help with some repairs around the neighborhood. Through these small but significant acts of kindness, John felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't the rebuilding of his home that gave him this hope, but the rebuilding of his faith. He realized that the things he had valued most, his home, his possessions, his savings, were all transient. They could be lost in an instant, just as they had been. But the one thing that would never fail him was his relationship with God. His true refuge, his true strength, was not in bricks and mortar, but in God's unwavering presence in his life. He began to understand that the fire had burned away the things he had been holding on to too tightly. He had allowed his possessions to define him, and now, with nothing left but his faith, he was discovering that God was more than enough. As time went on, John slowly rebuilt his life. The process was not easy, but every step forward brought him closer to a deeper understanding of God's provision and care. With each day, he saw how God had been with him through the journey, providing for his needs in ways he had never expected. His church family had stepped in when he needed them most, and even strangers had become instruments of God's love. John's heart was filled with gratitude. Months later, as John stood in front of his congregation on a Sabbath morning, his voice steady but filled with emotion, he shared his testimony with the church. "Losing everything was the hardest thing I've ever faced," he began, his eyes meeting the gaze of his fellow believers. "But through this trial, I've learned that God is truly my refuge. When I had nothing left, He provided in ways I never imagined. I'm stronger now, not because of what I own, but because I know that God will always take care of me." He paused, looking out at the congregation. "You see, I thought I was building a home, but what I've really been building is my trust in God. He's shown me that even when things fall apart, He is there to pick up the pieces. I've learned that I don't need to rely on what I can see with my eyes. I need to rely on the one who has always been with me, even in the toughest moments." The room was silent, filled with the weight of John's words. There was a sense of peace that filled the space. The congregation, who had watched John's journey from the beginning, felt a renewed sense of awe in God's faithfulness. They had seen firsthand how God had been with John through the fire, providing for him in unexpected ways. It was a living testimony to the truth of Psalm 46:1. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. John's testimony resonated deeply with everyone in the room. It was a reminder that no matter what challenges we face, God is with us. Our strength doesn't come from our possessions or our ability to control circumstances. It comes from trusting in God, who is always present, always faithful, and always ready to help. Reflection. We often think of refuge as a physical place, a home, a fortress, something tangible that can protect us from the storms of life. But true refuge is not found in what we can touch or see. It's found in the God who promises to be with us through every trial. In times of hardship, we may not understand why we have to go through difficult seasons, but God uses those times to strengthen our faith and teach us to rely on Him fully. John's story teaches us that even in the midst of loss, there is gain. In losing the things he had placed his trust in, he found the one thing that would never fail: God. No matter what storms we face in life, whether they be physical, emotional, or spiritual, God is our refuge. He provides strength when we feel weak and sends help in ways we least expect. Let us trust Him completely, knowing that His provision is always sufficient. And just as He was there for John in his moment of despair, He will be there for us, offering comfort, strength, and love in every season of life. May we never forget that God is our refuge, our strength, and our ever-present help in trouble. No matter what challenges we face, He is always with us, guiding us through the storms and reminding us that we are never alone.